Good morning. I want to welcome everyone participating in this morning's webinar. My name is Patrick Crosby. I'm a senior tax accountant at Gelman, Rosenberg Freedman, and I will be today's moderator. I'd like to start off today with some quick housekeeping items, as well as explain what participants need to do to earn CPE credit for today's webinar. For the best sound quality, we highly recommend you connect by phone instead of by computer. If you have any technical questions or issues during the webinar, please use the questions function to speak with our webinar administrator for assistance. Please note this webinar will be recorded and made available on our website following the event. The slides will also be posted at the address found at the bottom of this slide. Webinar participants seeking CPE credit for this presentation must complete and submit a short evaluation survey that will appear automatically immediately following the webinar. Please write down the CPE words when they are given, for they will not be provided again. You will be asked to recall these words in order to receive credit. If you have an active pop-up blocker, please take a moment and disable it now so that it will not block the survey. Any technical questions about the survey may be addressed to Dominic Acosta at dacosta@grfcpa.com. As the title of the webinar implies, today's learning objective is to provide attendees with a better understanding of the 8 drivers of company value. 1 CPE credit is available to attendees of today's webinar. With all that said, welcome to today's webinar, Maximizing Returns by Focusing on the 8 Drivers of Company Value. I'd like to introduce our speakers, Walter Dial and Pat Ennis. Walter Dial is a partner and the director of GRF's Tax and Exit Planning Consulting Division. Walter addresses particularly complex tax issues with clients concerning investments, estate and gift taxes, with a specific concentration in helping business owners transition their businesses. Pat Ennis is the founder and president of Ennis Legacy Partners. With decades of experience in financial services, for-profit and nonprofit leadership and management, along with the founding of ELP in 2010, Pat has extensive knowledge and understanding of the many challenges faced by business owners. Before I turn over the presentation, we will have our first polling question. The question is, how much revenue does your company generate? A, less than $1 million, B, $1 to $10 million, C, more than $10 million. Please take a moment now to answer. While participants are recording their answers, I'll provide the first CPE word. The first CPE word is value. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot these words down because you will need them for the survey following the webinar. Again, the first CPE word is value, V-A-L-U-E. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Walter.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Patrick, and thank you to everyone for attending this morning's webinar. Let's take a look at the results from our first polling question. So let's see, 41% of people are more than 10 million in revenue for their business, 35% less than $1 million, and 24% 1 to 10 million. So that's pretty similar, I would say, to the type of clients that Pat and I tend to work with. Most of our clients we work with are in the between $1 million to 20 million in revenue. Most probably more in the 5 to 15, something like that. So thank you very much for answering this question, and it sounds like you're in the right place as far as this topic goes. So let me over the last few years, Pat and I have worked with a lot of business owners in helping them develop the best plan for exiting their business. One of the things that we often encounter, and it's kind of a roadblock to implementing the exit plan or even implementing a strategic financial plan that might just be part of the overall exit plan. And that's the business owner doesn't view their business as a valuable asset. They see its ability to generate income, but they often, they just don't see it as an asset whose value can be increased and then sold. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I recently met with a very successful business owner. She's running a business that generates around $500,000 in annual income. All the this entire 500,000 comes out to fund her lifestyle. So, she works hard, and like a lot of my clients, they make pretty good money, work hard, and they're approaching that age in their mid 50s or whatever, where they're starting to think about, what's the rest of their life going to look like. So we were discussing exit planning, and specifically her desire to retire, hopefully in about 5 years. And financially, she was thinking when she retired, she would like to be able to continue to receive $500,000 of annual income. And she was thinking that the proceeds from the sale of her business would generate that much income. Well, as we're going to see shortly as we go through the presentation, the average business sells for somewhere between 3 and 4 times net income. So, her business, like I said, was generating about 500,000. Best case scenario, her business, could be worth around $2 million. By the time she sells it and pays taxes, she's got about $1.5 million left. Best case scenario for $1.5 million is that maybe she could generate $100,000 to $150,000 a year for the rest of her life. So clearly, it wasn't a great situation. Something needed to be done. So her initial thought was, well, she basically said, well, I guess I'll have to work harder and work more years. Well, in my experience, you can certainly do that. Your quality of life goes down, and you really only make a marginal improvement on your overall ability to retire successfully. But if we step back and we look at her business as a valuable asset, then we can start to see a solution to the problem. So looking at our basic valuation formula that I just mentioned, which was basically net income times a multiple, it's clear that we can increase the value of the business in 2 ways. We can increase the net income, and we can change the business model in some way to increase the multiple. Now, keep in mind, one of the really great things is that the 2 factors are related. So if you increase one of them, you automatically have a positive impact on the other. So you really get a big bang for your buck by focusing on increasing either or both of these factors. So let's say that over a 5-year period, we can increase the net income in this business up to $1 million. And we can also make some changes to the business model, how it's run, and we can get the multiple up to 7. Now the company's worth $7 million. In addition, if my client's diligent in keeping her lifestyle at $500,000 a year, she'd have the opportunity to probably save another couple $1 million over the 5-year period. So now, after taxes, we're looking at, she would have about $7 million, and that could actually generate very close to $500,000 over her remaining life. So, there is a way out, but in order to accomplish this, she needs to change the perspective she has on her business. The business has to change in her mind from being like an ATM generating cash to instead thinking of it as a valuable investment, paying dividends, but also with a lot of potential to appreciate in value. So, our goal for this webinar is really twofold. One, we want to get you thinking of your business as a valuable asset. And then number 2, we want to share with you some ways to grow the value of the asset. So in the following slides, we're going to be drawing from data generated by a company called Value Builder, which has compiled data on more than 40,000 companies, which its advisors have worked with. We'll also be looking at a number of real-life case studies from the Value Builder client archives. Pat and I, by the way, are both Value Builder consultants. So let's start our discussion on value by looking at what I call the 2 macro factors of valuation, and those are size and industry. So this slide, I think, just kind of confirms what most of us would have expected, which is that larger companies sell for larger multiples. When you think about it, there's lots of reasons for this. In the broadest sense, the multiple you get is dependent upon the quality of your cash flow. And by quality, I mean, how risky is it? Larger companies have lots of features that make their cash flow less risky. They have management teams in place. They have good business systems in place, like HR departments and finance departments. They may have geographic diversity. They're less likely to be dependent upon a single customer, supplier, or employee. And all of these features make them a less risky investment than a company that's lacking one or more of these features. So because of that, they are more valuable. Let's look at our second macro factor, which is industry. So you can see from this chart, the different industries demand different multiples. A lot of this has to do with growth potential of certain industries and also barriers to entry. So for instance, manufacturing has the highest multiple, and that's because it's very expensive to start a manufacturing company. Also keep in mind that industries can go through periods where they're really hot. Think back to the tech bubble. Tech companies were selling for unbelievable multiples, which ultimately proved to be, crazy. But just keep in mind that it's pretty hard to do as far as timing when to sell your business, hoping that your industry is at a hot spot. But that definitely can happen. So let's take a look at our first case study. So this is Jill Nelson. She founded a company called Ruby Receptionists. Ruby Receptionists provides an answering service, mostly for attorneys and contractors. Smaller businesses often don't have resources to hire a full-time receptionist, but they don't want potential clients and customers calling them and just going to voicemail. So you hire a company like Ruby Receptionists so that when someone calls, you're greeted by a live voice and they can, take a message or transfer your call. So it certainly is not a glamorous business. In fact, the profit margins for this type of business are really pretty small, probably around 10%. So, if her revenue is 11 million and her profit percentage is around 10%, she's generating about 1.1 million. If we go back to the chart, she's in the administrative support business, which is only a 1.8 multiple. So if you do the math, her company should be worth about $2 million. Maybe a little more given its size, but somewhere between $2 and $3 million. Somehow, as you can see on the slide, she was able to sell it for nearly $39 million. So if the two macro factors, size and industry, are the most critical in valuing a company, and many people believe they are, how do we explain the price that Jill Nelson was able to receive when she sold her company? Pat, what do you think?
Well, I think actually we both know, Walter, there must be something else. And Jill Nelson proved that, didn't she, with Ruby Receptionist? It can't just be about your revenue or industry. There must be other factors. And the other factors are drivers that we see going beyond revenue and industry. They're impacting the value and the sellability of a business. And the first one that we want to talk about today is recurring revenue. There's no way around it. The more recurring revenue you have, the more valuable your business is going to be. If we look at average multiples versus those with at least 3/4 of the revenue coming from recurring sources, the businesses with recurring revenue are getting much better and bigger multiples. Well, you may be asking at this point, those listening, what do you mean by recurring revenue? Well, we mean that it's revenue that's going to come in without you having to motivate or stimulate the buyer again. In other words, the customer has to make an opt-out decision rather than an opt-in decision. You're going to bill them unless they tell you to stop. And this can be things like subscriptions, service contracts, annuities, any kind of customer arrangement where revenue continues past the point of sale for any extended period. Those businesses are trading at higher multiples than businesses without recurring revenue. Okay, so now you might be thinking, well, that would be great if I was a wealth management firm with annuity business or a software company like Microsoft, but I have a retail business or I'm a manufacturer. And this recurring revenue thing just doesn't fit with what we do. And we understand that, but we want you to just take a few minutes here today, open your mind, put on your thinking cap, we've come to believe that no matter what industry you're in, you actually can figure out a way to create some recurring revenue. And one of the reasons we're confident in saying that is because of the story of H. Bloom. H. Bloom, if you haven't heard of these guys, they're in one of the toughest industries. They're in the business of selling flowers. And if you've ever taken a look at the economics of selling flowers, it's just a brutal industry. First, you've got 2 days of the calendar year, 2 days, Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, that drives 1/3 of your revenue. So, of course, you're going to hire extra staff around those 2 days, and then probably lay most everyone else off for the other 363 days. Not only that, your inventory starts dying as soon as the farmer cuts it. In fact, a month or so in the fridge, the flowers are beginning to rot. They die. You can't sell them. A typical flower store in the U.S. will throw out more than 60% of their inventory. So think about that. 60% of your cost of goods sold gets put in the trash because you guessed wrong. Well, then comes along these two guys, Sonu, Panda on the left and Bryan, Burkhart on the right, and they decide we're going to tackle this tough road of selling flowers, but we're going to do it in a unique way. Excuse me. They decided that they were going to sell flowers on subscription. They went around to hotels, wealth management companies, spas, businesses that want fresh cut flowers in their lobbies. And the guys at H. Bloom sold these businesses on the idea that they would now own the responsibility of making sure high quality flowers were in their lobbies, and that they would do it on a subscription basis. The customers would no longer have to worry about having flowers delivered on time and regularly. H. Bloom was going to own the entire process, make it happen for a monthly fee. Now they have the fastest growing floral and plant service in the world. So when Sonu was interviewed by John Warlow of The Value Builder, John asked, what's the best thing, Sonu, about a recurring revenue model? And he highlighted predictability. Sonu said that we throw out less than 2% of our inventory each month because we only buy the right amount of flowers we need for each customer, so that we don't have spoilage. And so again, compare that to the typical flower store who has 60% spoilage rates. Not only that, but Sonu, of course, referenced their recurring, stable, predictable revenue. The average lifetime value of a subscriber at H. Bloom is $4,500. Compare that with the average transaction of a typical flower store of $29. Okay, so which company would you rather own? Which company would you rather buy if you're a buyer of flower businesses? So again, the companies like H. Bloom that create recurring revenue will be most valuable, no doubt about it. That's the first piece of advice in maximizing the value of your business that we want to give you today. Create recurring revenue, no matter what your industry's in. We think you can do it. And if you think your industry isn't conducive to recurring revenue, remember these guys at selling flowers at H. Bloom. And so now Walter is going to talk about the importance of differentiating your business.
Thanks, Pat. And I think you made a really good point for our listeners this morning, is that, a lot like this topic I'm about to cover, monopoly control. It's really easy to say, well, there's no way I'm ever going to have a monopoly in my industry. Just like it's easy to say, well, my business isn't conducive to recurring revenue. But the important thing to take away this morning, I believe, is, yeah, maybe you're never going to have a monopoly in your industry, and maybe your entire business can't be turned into a recurring revenue model. But there's certain aspects of all these value drivers that we're going to share with you this morning that you can build into your business. It may just be taking a small part of your business and turning that into recurring revenue, but maybe that could grow. And just like monopoly, yeah, chances are you're never going to have a total monopoly in your industry, but you can incorporate some of the characteristics of a company that does have a monopoly into your business, and that's going to make it more valuable. So let's take a look at this monopoly control value driver. So, Warren Buffett has said a lot of smart things, obviously, but one of his favorite quotes is that, or one of his favorite things to say is that he likes to invest in companies with a wide and deep competitive moat. So he likes companies that have very little outside competitive threats. And the reason for that is because they've been able to develop a point of differentiation for their company that makes their business unique in some way. So if we look at it from a buyer's perspective, a buyer is going to do what they call a buy versus build analysis before making a decision to either expand their existing business or to enter into a new industry. So if you have a business that just provides some type of commoditized service or product, and some other companies looking to get into your industry or your marketplace, they really don't need to buy you. They can just start offering the exact same service or product at a lower price, and eventually they'll just take your business from you. But if you have a unique point of differentiation, it's going to cost them a lot of time and a lot more money to build a similar business. In that case, the better decision is to buy your business. Now, you don't have to have a literal monopoly on your industry to benefit from this concept. Your company just has to have some of the qualities of a monopoly. Let's look at the example. Let me go through the multiples first. So companies with a multiple or with a monopoly in their market, they get about, on average, their multiple was about 50% higher than companies that don't have some of these qualities of a monopoly. Let's take a look at a case study. So this is Stephanie Breedlove. And Stephanie and her husband worked at Anderson Consulting. So, pretty smart people, kind of understood finances and accounting and things like that. They decided to start a family. So Stephanie, they had a child, and being an accountant, she wanted to make sure that she was handling the reporting and payroll taxes for her household employee correctly. She didn't want to do it herself, though. So at the time, she contacted ADP, which many of you may be familiar with. They're a very large payroll processing company. There's a number of companies out there like ADP. She contacted them to inquire if they'd be willing to prepare the payroll tax reporting for her lone household employee. Well, needless to say, they weren't real interested. They bumped her around to about 5 different people in the company before she realized that, these people are just not interested in my business. So she had a great idea. She said, why don't I just start providing this service? There's got to be other people out there in my same situation. So she started Breedlove Associates. And all the business did was prepare basically nanny taxes. So she continued to build the business. At some point, the business got to around, kind of plateaued at about 500 clients and about 300,000 of revenue. So at that point, Stephanie had to make a decision. This was back in the 90s, and a lot of the rage back then in business consulting was the whole concept of cross-selling. The idea was, I think we've all heard it, it's like 90% cheaper to sell something to an existing customer than it is to go out and find a new client or customer. So that was a lot of what people were telling her to do. She had a client base of about 500. They were very, very happy with her. They found her service to be very valuable. She was doing a great job. So it would have been pretty easy for her to get them to buy additional services from her. But her other option would be just keep doing what she's doing, but find a lot more clients, a lot more parents with a family. So the route she decided to go was the latter. She decided to just keep doing what she's doing, but find a lot more clients. So she was able to grow the business up to 10,000 clients, about $9 million in revenue. And at that point, she sold it to care.com for $54 million. So, as we've been talking about valuations, this is a really high multiple, obviously. So why would care.com pay so much for this business? Well, care.com is kind of like the Angie's List of care providers. At the time, they had 7 million subscribers. So if 1% of their subscribers use this payroll service, that would mean 70,000 new customers. So from a company of 9 million revenue with 10,000 customers, the business would grow to 72 million in revenue from 80,000 customers. And that's if only 1% of the subscribers use the service. So the business had a lot of potential for care.com. The other important point that this story illustrates is that Stephanie was able to stay out of what Value Builder calls the owner's trap. Remember back to the big decision she had to make when she was at $300,000 of revenue. She could have chosen to add more services. If she did this, the new services, at least initially, would have to be centered around her. They'd be based on her expertise, which means clients would be looking to her to solve their problems and resolve issues surrounding the new service. It would be pretty inefficient, and whatever growth she was able to generate would most likely be discounted by a potential buyer because it's based on her skills. It's not necessarily transferable value. So here are some signs that you may be in the owner's trap. If you look on the right-hand side, I mean, things like if you go away for an extended vacation, does business slow down? Are customers coming to you when something goes wrong instead of someone else on your team? Has your revenue plateaued? Has the business kind of flattened out? When Pat and I encounter this problem with clients, which is quite often, especially in smaller businesses, we sit down with the owner and help them rate their services or products based on 3 factors: teachability, repeatability, and value to the customer. We then help them to focus on the highest scoring services or products. If we think of the operations of Breedlove, number one, it's a very teachable process. It's very easy to teach people how to do payroll returns for household employees. Nothing real tricky to it. It's very repeatable. Customer number 10,001 is exactly like the other previous 10,000 customers. You're going to be doing the exact same thing for them. And despite its relative simplicity, it's a very valuable service to clients. Just ask if you remember back, you can just ask the various people who couldn't get confirmed to the Supreme Court and other government positions because they didn't handle their household employee taxes correctly. Of course, if your company's big enough, you can avoid the owner's trap by buying a company that provides the additional services you want to add. And this is exactly what Care.com did. Pat, back to you.
Yeah, so number 3 on our list of value drivers today is the degree in which your customers are willing to recommend or refer your business. So if you could put yourself in the shoes of a potential buyer of your business for a minute or two and think about what they might do to really evaluate your business if they were thinking about making you an offer. One of the things they try to do is evaluate the satisfaction level of your customers. They would want to figure out, are these customers happy? Are they likely to be repeat customers and for the long term? And one of the proxies they use for that is what's called the Net Promoter Score. And you may have heard of the Net Promoter Score. You may even be using it in your business. It was developed by a guy named Fred Reichheld of Bain & Company. It's a way to measure the likelihood that your clients are going to take on one of 2 behaviors. They're either going to repurchase from you or they're going to refer you to others. And if you think about critical elements necessary to grow a company, they absolutely include, don't they, repeat customers and their willingness to refer their friends. Which is why when you track the growth rate of average Net Promoter Score businesses, and that would be the gray line on the chart you see there on the screen, against the high achieving growth companies, the green line, you see that their growth rate is more than 2 times that of the average companies. So the real market leaders in Net Promoter Score, such as Google, Apple, Eventbrite, Harley-Davidson, are growing at a much quicker rate than the average performing companies. So why is that? Well, because the Net Promoter Score, Bain & Company has found, Reichheld found, is very predictive of future growth rate for your company. And it is so because it is correlated to your customers taking on one of those 2 behaviors that result in growth: repurchase of goods and services and referrals. So the next thing we'd recommend you would be to start measuring and strengthening your Net Promoter Score. And To do that, you're going to survey a group of your customers, ask them one simple question. This is the beauty about the Net Promoter Score. It's one simple question. And here it is. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to refer us to a friend or colleague? I'll say that again. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to refer us to a friend or a colleague? Then you're going to categorize your responses into one of three buckets. You're going to have as a group, hopefully a big group, what Reichheld refers to as the promoters. These are the 9s and the 10s. Then you will have the passives. This is likely to be a fairly big group. These are the 7s and the 8s. The passives are not particularly satisfied or likely to repurchase or refer you, but they're also not likely to badmouth you. Then finally, of course, you might have some detractors. Hopefully this is the smallest group, and they've scored you anywhere from 0 to 6, and they may be actively bad-mouthing you in the marketplace. And they're very unlikely, of course, to repurchase or refer you to others. And so if you look at the hypothetical on the screen, we can see how you can calculate your score. You simply subtract your detractor percentage, in this case 5%, from your promoter score of 25%, and you're left with the 20%. Now, if this was an illustration, if this illustration was a real life scenario, this score would actually be above average at 20%. Reichheld's research showed that an average score was between 10 and 15, so 20% is actually pretty good. Anything over 50% is world class. And so that's the next piece of advice we'd offer. And it's not just Reichheld who thinks this is critical, but private equity firms like Blackbird Ventures, virtually every large enterprise company like Apple, Google, GE, FedEx, Marriott, they all use the Net Promoter Score. And so you're going to want to use it too to predict your growth as well. And I'll make one last comment about the benefits of the Net Promoter Score. A potential buyer is buying future cash flow, and they want to have confidence in that. They want to have confidence in your cash flow, future growth projections. And if you've got a strong Net Promoter Score, that's going to boost their confidence and henceforth boost your multiple. And I think Patrick has a poll question at this point.
Yeah, so our second polling question is a follow-up to our previous polling question. The question is, when did your company last calculate its Net Promoter Score? A, in the past 12 months, B, in the past 3 years, C, over 3 years ago, D, never. So please take a moment now to answer. And while participants are recording their answers, I'll provide the second CPE word. The second CPE word is score. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot these words down because you will need them for the survey following the webinar. Again, the second CPE word is score, S-C-O-R-E.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the results. When did your company last calculate its Net Promoter Score? Never. 95% of you never. Okay, good. Or not good, but thanks for responding. Over 3 years ago, 0. And it just went, the others, I lost the results there, Patrick, but I think
they were 0 too.
12 months was 5%, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, again, advice would be to get started on the Net Promoter Score. You'll benefit in a lot of different ways. Now, Walter's going to talk about how the importance of independence.
Thanks, Pat. As a side note, it's interesting, the Breedlove company that I talked about in my last case study, their NPS score was 78. I think you said world class was anything over 50. So they had some extremely satisfied customers, which of course helped to drive the value of that sale. So let's move on to the next value driver, which is what Value Builder calls the Switzerland structure. So when you think of Switzerland, what's the first thing that pops in your mind? Maybe Swiss cheese or the Alps, something like that. But in the context of value building, what we want to pop into your mind when you think of Switzerland is independence. So Switzerland, it's a fiercely independent country. It didn't take sides in either world war. It doesn't use the euro as its currency. It prides itself on independence. From a company valuation perspective, it's important to be independent with regard to three factors: customer concentration, supplier concentration, and reliance on one key employee. So we think of customer concentration. If any one customer represents more than 15% of your revenue, that's a red flag from a valuation standpoint. Now, we're not saying it's necessarily bad to have a customer that represents that percentage, but if you're in that situation, the goal is to go out and find more and more customers so that 15% shrinks naturally. You don't want to get rid of your 15% client. You just want to get other clients so that you're not as dependent upon them, so that the business isn't at risk if you happen to lose that large client. Supplier concentration, and we're going to talk about this in the case study, but if you think about it, if you're too reliant on one supplier, they could go out of business, which would directly harm your business. They could decide, you know what, we don't really need to be this guy's supplier anymore. Let's become his competitor, especially if they're bigger and they feel like they can do it easily. Or they might just change the pricing model. So you've been quoting clients at a certain rate, they change their rates. All of a sudden, you've got to now change your rates that you're proposing to clients, and the business may be in trouble because of that. And the final factor, and the one that I would say Pat and I see most often, is reliance on a key employee. And that's usually reliance on the owner of the company. So let's take a look at our next case study. So this is Rick Day, and he owned a company called Daycom Solutions. Now, our other case studies have been incredible success stories. This one is really more of a cautionary tale. And this is what can happen when you're too reliant on a single supplier. So Daycom Solutions, they were phone system integrators. So, they would come to your company, they would write out specs for a new phone system, they'd install it and make sure it was integrated with all of your other technology. And at the time, there were a number of companies that built phone systems. Rick's company started to use Avaya a lot, to the point where Avaya was giving them extra rebates, really good terms, things like that. So at one point, 90% of the proposals that Rick was writing involved Avaya equipment. So you can see where he had a serious supplier concentration problem. I mean, what if Avaya, and I forget what happened to them, maybe they did go bankrupt, but what would happen if they went bankrupt? All of a sudden, his supplier's gone. Again, what if they decide to become a competitor? Or what if they just decide to increase their prices? All three things would have a dramatic impact on Daycom Solutions. So what that does is it makes their business risky. When your business is risky, your multiples go down. So it's a $26 million revenue business. Just based on size, we would think he'd probably be able to sell it for 5 to 7 times net revenue. He's a systems integrator, which is probably even maybe even be a little higher multiple than that. But what did he end up selling for? 4 times EBITDA, which is basically the same thing as net income with some adjustments. So, and if you look at it closer, he got 40% upfront. He received 40% on a 3-year note. And the final 20% was subject to an earnout, which means that it wasn't guaranteed in any way. In fact, the company had to hit certain financial milestones in order for him to get that last 20%. So, most business advisors would really say what he sold for was 80% of a 4 multiple. So he basically sold a $26 million company and only received a 3.2 multiple. If you go back to our size chart, that's actually less than what a $1 million company should sell for. So you can see the implications of having serious supplier concentration problems. And it would be the same if it was a customer concentration issue or reliance on a key employee. So like I mentioned, we've don't usually see this supplier problem. I mean, occasionally, but not very often. It's not a major issue for our clients. But what really is reliance on the owner. So let's take a look at that. So this is just a chart that kind of shows you kind of different levels of owner involvement in the company and the impact that has on your multiple. So you start at the top where the answer to the question is, I know each. So the question is, he knows each of his customers by first name. The multiple is only a 2.92. You get to the last bar where I don't know my customers personally, and I rarely get involved in serving an individual customer. The multiple is up to over 4.5. So, it's kind of intuitive, but it also kind of isn't, because on the one hand, you're thinking, well, gee, the guy who knows all his customers by first name, they must be thrilled with him. What a great business. As opposed to the bottom part, which is the guy never gets involved in serving an individual customer. But this is where our perspective on our business, has to be looked at, because what we're looking at is the value of the company. So if someone is in a business where they know all their customers by first name, number one, they probably have a pretty small company. Number two, they probably don't have a lot of systems and other things in place that make the company valuable that would increase the multiple. They've probably got a lot of issues in a business like that. But the other thing, to keep in mind is, and one of the reasons I find this chart interesting, is that as you progress down the chart, it really represents the transitional steps that a successful growing business would take. So if you think about it, a successful growing business, they'll transition from that first one where you start your business, you have a couple customers, so of course you know them by name. But then you grow, you start to, hopefully, if you're successful, you start to grow, you start to delegate things like maybe sales and accounting and other things that would be where you would be interfacing with clients. And then you continue to grow. So now you still know some of your customers by first name, but probably not many. And then eventually you've got this great team in place that you have trained, and the customers are perfectly happy and being served very well by this team. So you really are rarely getting involved in serving an individual customer, and you probably don't know many of them anymore. So that's the point where the transferable value of the business is at its highest. And, it could be, I know, like, in just my own accounting practice, I mean, I, for a long time, prided myself that I did a lot of stuff myself. But at the end of the day, that limits the value of my practice, because the value of my practice is tied to how many clients are going to stay with this firm when I leave. If I'm the only person they interact with, that's a risky situation. So, just my own personal business, I can definitely relate to this. But, this transition can be very difficult for owners who are reluctant to give up control. It's just human nature to believe that no one's going to serve a client the way that we can. But if an owner allows themselves, to kind of be restrained by this type of thinking, their business growth potential is limited, along with the ultimate valuation for their company. The key is to have systems in place to train employees to deliver excellent service, so the clients don't need to always be in contact with the owner. The NPS score that Pat was just talking about is a great tool for measuring how you're doing in this regard. One other thing about this chart, and it's kind of ironic, I think, is that if you look at the quality of life between the first bar and the last bar, it's amazing, because you have clients who they don't want to give up control, which means by definition they're dealing with clients one-on-one. They're dealing with all the individual problems. Whereas if you get to that last bar, all of a sudden you're rarely getting involved in any type of issues with clients, and your business is worth a whole lot more than it was. So it's just amazing how many business owners, and Pat can attest to this, that we work with who are literally going crazy because they won't give up ownership of many of the business functions that would, number one, make their life a whole lot easier, and number two, make their business a whole lot more valuable. So let's take a look at, Pat will take us through the final value builder.
Yeah, you know, that last issue there, the dependence or independence of an owner in relation to the business, it directly has direct impact. And you mentioned it, Walter, on this next value driver, which is growth potential. And one of the questions that we ask on the value builder questionnaire that we've mentioned here during the presentation is, how easy would it be for you to accommodate 5 times your current demand? And clearly, if the business is almost all completely dependent on the owner, boy, you're really going to be challenged in that, aren't you? Well, imagine if you had 5 times more demand for your product overnight. If suddenly you had 5 times more customers knocking on your door tomorrow morning, how easy, or by contrast, impossible would it be to accommodate that demand? Businesses that cannot scale quickly are realizing big discounts compared to those who are saying and proving that it would be relatively easy for them to scale up. Let's think of Netflix, for example. It probably would be fairly easy for them to scale up to meet big demand. They might start up a few more servers, you know, spark up a few more IP addresses, probably make a few phone calls, and they meet higher demand. Whereas maybe if you're a law firm, it would be tougher to scale up quickly. You got to hire more attorneys, more staff. It's just tougher to do quicker. And so the message we want you to remember is that businesses that can scale and scale quickly, and that the buyers see that there is still a lot of room for future growth that can be scaled, are the ones that get purchased at a premium. And so from a buyer's perspective, they want to know, and we want to use a farmer's analogy here, that there's still some field left to go plow and harvest. If you've harvested 95% of the field already, the buyer will look at it and see that, and see that there really isn't much growth potential left for them. And so they may, if they buy your business, they're going to pay you a discount for it rather than a premium for a growth-oriented company. Which brings us to the story of Rod Drury. Rod's a New Zealander, a successful serial entrepreneur. His latest venture was a software service company called Xero that he founded in 2006. In 2017, he sold a big stake of it for $97 million. And Rod got the money to start Xero from the sale of another company he founded years ago called Aftermail. Aftermail was a $2 million software company that Rod sold for $35 million. So again, let's remember, it's more than just revenue, as Rod proves here, to get a high multiple at sales. So he sold his company for $35 million. He built Aftermail with 2 Fortune 500 customers at $1 million in revenue each. You know, so most entrepreneurs at that point would make plans to go after the other 498 Fortune 500s that they didn't have as customers, but that's not what Rod did. Instead, he approached a system integrator who had all of the Fortune 500 clients and said to them, I could go compete with you and probably be successful in selling the software to many of your customers, or I could simply sell you this company, my company, and you can quickly and easily scale up, sell this software to all of your customers. The system integrator bought the pitch and paid this crazy, insane multiple of $2 million on a $2 million business with a $35 million sale price. And, you know, it was made possible because Rod made the case that there was enormous growth potential in what he had created, and that they, with their resources in place and their customer base in place, they could scale it easily and quickly. So you want to make sure, whenever possible, that you leave some field that's left to plow and harvest if you want a maximum multiple. And I think, Patrick, do you have another poll question at this point?
Yes, we do. So the final polling question is, which of the following best describes your motivation for participating in today's webinar? A, ready to start planning my exit. B, want to increase the value of my business. C, want to have a more enjoyable business to run. So please take a moment now to answer. While participants are recording their answers, I'll provide the third CPE word. The third and final CPE word is exit. Again, the final CPE word is exit, E-X-I-T.
So the results, which of the following best describes your motivation for participating in today's webinar? 26% want to have a more enjoyable business to run. We hear that a lot. Want to increase the value of my business. We hear that a lot. And ready to start planning my exit, 0%. Want to increase the value of my business, 74%, I'm sorry. And want to have a more enjoyable business to run, 26%. So, Walter, you want to again summarize the value drivers that we've discussed today?
Yeah, let me make one comment about the poll. You know, it's really interesting, but it kind of alludes back to what I was talking about earlier. But the people who said I want to increase the value of my company, and the people who said I want to have a more enjoyable company to run, those two really go hand in hand. You know, it's funny when we get a call like for exit planning, and the person says, you know, I'd like to exit tomorrow. It's usually because they have a lousy business and they're going insane trying to run it. It's the people who have done everything right, and they've got basically a self-running company that is not causing a million headaches for them. They're not in any hurry to exit because they're loving life. So those two really go hand in hand. So just keep that in mind. I'm not going to bother going, in the interest of time, I'm not going to bother going through all these. It's just everything we've already discussed. So just have a few minutes left. We would like to answer some questions at the end. Let me have Pat kind of describe what we believe are some really great next steps for you, and then we'll answer some questions.
Yeah, well, thanks, Walter. One other point along the lines of what you were just commenting on, you know, when it comes to exit planning, central and foundation to a sound and successful exit planning is building a business that's sellable. Because if you do that, not only are you going to have more freedom that Walter was alluding to, but you're also going to have more options for exit. If you're going to transfer to insiders, sell to a third party, whatever it is, the business is going to have to be sellable. So yes, the next step is that we're going to recommend is impactful, but extremely easy. We referred to it a few times. The Value Builder Score Questionnaire takes about 15 minutes to complete, after which you'll instantly receive your Value Builder score out of 100. And based on the quantitative analysis of more than 40,000 business owners, companies that achieve a score of 80 plus are predicted to get offers that are 71% higher than the average business. So you can get an overall sellability score and individual scores in each of those value drivers that we've covered today. And, you know, we've arranged it so typically someone completing the questionnaire would receive a one summary with the scores in each value driver. But for those of you listening here today, if you complete it in the next 48 hours, I've set it up to where you'll actually receive a full 27-page report. And if you can't get to it in the next 48 hours, just contact me or Walter, and we'll make sure you get the full 27-page report at no charge. And you can access that questionnaire. Well, you can see it there, nslp.com/free sellability score, and which is listed there on the presentation. So we strongly advise you to take that 15 minutes, invest that 15 minutes. It's a minimal investment of time, but will have great impact in helping you build the value, which 74% of you indicated that you want to do.
Thanks, Pat. So Patrick, do we have any questions?
We do. So we have a few questions submitted by our online participants. We picked out 3. I'll direct the first question to you, Pat. It reads, what would you consider the most important aspect of a successful exit plan to be, and how can I position myself to exit on my own terms?
Well, you know what? We just mentioned it just a second ago, so I don't have to get into this in the interest of time. But really, building a sellable value, a sellable business. There's nothing more important than that, because you'll have more options and you will be more in control of your exit if you have a sellable business.
Great. The second question I'll direct to you, Walter. It reads, you mentioned one way to help businesses reduce their dependence on the owner is through incentive compensation plans. How does that work?
So the whole idea of incentive compensation plans is you want to encourage your employees to begin acting like owners. And when they do that, everyone is a winner. With a properly designed incentive comp plan, the company makes more profit, the value of the company grows, and the employee makes more money too. So it's really a win-win-win for everybody. Let me think of an example. We've done a number of these plans over the last year, but the most recent one I did, actually, Pat and I are working together on a client. So it was a client who's in an industry, very tight margins, and one of the number one profit killers were overtime costs for their people. And I mean, these costs just have a dramatic impact on the bottom line. So we designed an incentive comp plan that rewarded district managers for meeting overtime goals. And it was amazing. I mean, they really started to run their little group of, each district manager had a number of buildings that they managed. They really started running those buildings like their own little company. And it was great. I mean, the amount of overtime went down dramatically. The district managers received some really nice incentive comp. The company had higher profits, which meant the value was going up. So, the other really cool thing about it is the incentive compensation that you're paying to the employee is just coming out of the increased profits. It didn't cost the business owner anything. In fact, the business owner was making more profit and the value of the business was going up. So it was great.
Great. So the final question I'll again direct to you, Walter. The first case study said that Ruby Receptionist was sold for $38.8 million, but you never told us why it was sold for so much. Can you discuss that further?
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that. That's a good question. That's exactly right. We just kind of left everybody hanging on that one. Let me just see if I remember. So there were a few factors involved in why the business sold for such a huge multiple. One thing was it was a very large customer base, so they had a lot of customer diversification. I think my memory serves me. They had like 6,000 customers or something like that. And each one was only revenue of a few $100s a month. So losing a customer or two was not, or more than that, wasn't going to have any impact really on the revenue stream. And it was also one of Pat's topics. It was recurring revenue. Everybody had a monthly contract. But the big difference for them, and it goes back to my discussion of having a unique differentiation point, is that what Ruby Receptionist did, and if you think of this business, it's not necessarily mom and pop, but there are a lot of smaller receptionists like businesses. And what they'll do is, they hire a few people to take calls. And what can happen is they can get overwhelmed. So even though you've hired this receptionist service, your potential clients can still end up in voicemail. So what Ruby Receptionist did is they actually developed a custom technology that ensured that no matter when a call came in, it would be routed to an available live receptionist. So if you used Ruby Receptionist, no one ever went to voicemail. They always got a live receptionist, which was a really big deal in that industry. And that was their differentiation point. That was, their monopoly characteristic. So they ended up being bought out by a private equity firm. And the reason they got such a huge multiple was the private equity firm looked at that technology and they saw potential for it, either in using it with other businesses they already owned and also introducing it to businesses that they were going to purchase. So that's the reason for that huge multiple. Thanks for asking that question. I didn't want people not being able to sleep tonight, not knowing the answer to that one. So Patrick, I think you can, we're at 12 o'clock. You can wrap us up.
Great. So if you have any additional questions after today's program, please reach out to us. Our contact information appears here. And with that, GRF would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We encourage you to always check our website for upcoming events and updates, some of which we've listed here on this slide. Please remember to complete the emailed survey that follows if you would like to earn CPE credit for attending today's webinar. Thank you again for attending, and have a great day.